Hello everyone, welcome to the online summit Recovery After Childbirth. I'm Yela. I'm Mina. And today with us is Rachelle Garcia Seliga. Rachelle is a mother, a midwife and a wife, and has been working in the realms of holistic women's health for the past 17 years. Rachelle is the creator and director of Innate Postpartum Care Traditions, postpartum wellness trainings for birth and healthcare providers worldwide. Innate trainings provide a comprehensive framework of both maternal and postpartum needs and the biologic imperative of community support for the actualization of maternal wellness. Rachelle works from the perspective that maternal health is foundational to humanity's health, and that when we center mothers, we have a clear map to collective thriving health. Rachelle, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So today's title will be Healing Your Postpartum Journey, and not only if you are in postpartum right now, also for women who gave birth maybe 10 years ago. So my first question, Rachelle, would be if we view postpartum as a rite of passage, what happens if the woman doesn't get the recognition from her community?
So I think what happens and what most women in the modern world are familiar with is that's like a disorientation in the postpartum time, right? It's like it doesn't really matter how the birth experience was, if it was like the most fulfilling, empowering birth experience, or if we experience our birth as traumatic. In whatever manifestation that our birth was, it's still this tremendous experience. It's still a tremendous initiation. It's still a tremendous offering to the world. And we know that on a cellular level. And I think maybe what I would say is we've forgotten it, a lot of us, maybe on a mental level, but somewhere in our beings, we know that. And then when we don't have the community to reflect back to us this massive experience, this massive transition that we've been through, it's very disorienting. It's very confusing. It feels very isolating. It's that feeling of not being seen. And, even for women who haven't given birth, I feel like a way that we can understand it, a lot of us had childhood experiences where our parents, because of their unresolved trauma, really, it's like dealing with intergenerational trauma, because of our parents' unresolved trauma, they didn't really see us when we were children, right? Maybe they loved us and maybe they took care of us, but maybe they didn't have the capacity to reflect back to us who we really are. And without having a reflection of who we really are, it's very confusing and disorienting at any point in life. Okay, so even if we haven't had a baby, we can just imagine, how does that feel when we're not being accurately seen or accurately reflected back to in general? And then when we go through a major experience, right? So whether it's birth or whether it's someone dies in our family or whether we get divorced or whatever the big transition is, and when we're not seen for who we are in that experience and then coming out the other side, it's totally disorienting. And so that manifests as anxiety, depression. I mean, any emotion that we can name that's not an emotion that's uplifting and life-sustaining.
Thank you. But how could it affect the woman's body, soul, and mind?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's just the understanding that we're not like these separate bodies, like how allopathic medicine has panned it out to be for the last several hundreds of years, right? Like somehow my body is separate from my emotional experience. All traditional medicine systems understand that there is a complete body and mind connection, and the new science that confirms that, which everyone's ancestors have always known, is psychoneuroimmunology. And it's the impact of, it's the connection between our immune system, our nervous system, and our endocrine system, our hormonal system, and how they're all interrelated. So if a woman doesn't feel seen and heard and acknowledged in her postpartum time, on a physical level, to say it simply, is that she's not going to produce the same amount of oxytocin that she would if she was being seen and heard and nourished by her community. So what's the impact of insufficient oxytocin supply in the postpartum time? Well, oxytocin actually helps with healing. Oxytocin is what facilitates healing, like wound healing. And so, you know, anything from did we tear at birth to what's required for our body to come back into a pre-pregnant state after the birth experience, for our uterus to involute and return to its pre-pregnant state after birth, to being able to breastfeed our babies. Oxytocin is a foundational hormone of healing. And with insufficient oxytocin, those things are all really inhibited. And then you just think about it from this other lens too of, if we're not feeling adequately seen and supported and nourished and exalted, it produces more stress hormones in our body. And the primary stress hormones are cortisol and adrenaline. And those actually inhibit healing, and they suppress our immune system and make us sick in general over extended periods of time. So, you know, there's a lot of directions of how that can go, but the physical manifestation of the lack of adequate emotional, mental, and spiritual support for a postpartum mother looks like digestive problems. It looks like anxiety. It looks like depression. It looks like a really depressed immune system. So like constantly getting sick after you have a baby, you know, like you get a cold and then you recover, and then you get a cold and then you recover, and you're like, what is going on? And that can extend out not just from that early postpartum time, but when we're looking at like years after birth. You know, most women in the modern world like are not actually recovering from pregnancy and birth. And so they could be 3 or 4 years out after a birth experience, but like the symptomology that they're having physically is a result of insufficient care in the early postpartum time.
What are the most common problems that you're talking about now? If someone gave birth 10 years ago, what happens the most?
I mean, I would say like digestive problems are a really big one. You know, women, I mean, I think probably in the modern world, most of us have digestive problems to begin with because our births were interrupted, because how many rounds of antibiotics did our parents give us? Because how many vaccines were we given? Because was our own experience of being born into this world interrupted? And so what is the state of our own microbiome, right? So we're already weakened in our digestive states in the modern world. And then we go through birth, and because we're not receiving adequate care in the postpartum time, and specifically the appropriate foods in the postpartum time, if you talk to most women about when their digestive problems started, most of them will say after they had their last baby, right? And that could look like anything from irritable bowel syndrome to infrequent pooping, right? So someone's like, oh, I'm only pooping once every 3 days now. And not just what does that impact on our digestive system, but how does that affect our hormones, right? Because part of the reason that we poop, we eliminate, is to get rid of excess hormones, which we know is important in general, but especially in the modern world because of all of like the estrogen mimicking chemicals in our environments, right? So the digestive piece is a really huge piece, okay? And then I would say pelvic problems, you know, women 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 years after the birth of their last baby will pee involuntarily, you know, or even poop, so like urinary or fecal incontinence. And oftentimes, honestly, what happens is these women have gone to their doctors, their primary caregivers, their OBGYNs, you know, and they're told that this is normal and it's part of having a baby and there's nothing you can do. It's like, and especially when women have had multiple babies, they're like, you know, you've had 5 babies. It's just how it is. And that's completely inaccurate, incorrect information. You know, and then there's prolapse, right? So you can have bladder prolapse or uterine prolapse or rectal prolapse. And so all of these things really are compounded through our modern day pregnancy and birthing experiences, and really are often going unresolved. I mean, there's not a lot of practitioners still in the world who can care for all of the postpartum mothers. I mean, I live in the United States, I live in New Mexico, and I'm trying to resource like in the biggest city close to me, because I live rurally, who are the practitioners offering this work, right? Because I get a lot of messages from moms who find out about my work in the state, and they're like, we'll travel up to see you. But I'm not even doing that work right now, because I'm doing, all of my work time is going into this educational system that I've lifted up. So I'm trying to pull together a resource list of like what's even available in the state where I live. And there's not a whole lot. Like I haven't even found someone yet that I can refer mothers to comfortably, you know? And I know for a fact from my work that like there are like entire states in the United States where there are practitioners, and entire countries on the planet where there's not people, right? Where are moms going to go to get the help that they need? So pelvic problems, I mean, and then I would say, you know, immune problems, right? Like there's crazy levels of autoimmune conditions, including thyroid disorders, sprouting up in the postpartum time. These are not normal things. These are common in the modern day world, but they're not normal. And so our orientation is becoming this normalization of dis-ease. So it's not, our design is not to have a baby and then fall apart. Like that's not our design. That is the result of modern day birthing practices and insufficient postpartum care.
Yeah, it feels like we have less children, but the women are more sick than they used to be maybe 50 or 60 years ago when they had 5 or more children.
Yep.
Yeah, and if I may, I can testify to everything that was said here, everything you said, because I'm in my second postpartum now, and it's a whole different story than the first time. First time I was alone, well, not so much alone, but I didn't get the support and recognition I needed. And as for the second time, now Yela was and still is my doula, and knowing everything that I know as a doula, I mean, I had a community, thanks to her, of our colleagues, our friends who came to visit me every week, who made me special meals, gave me treatments, and I was in less pain. I didn't feel so anxious. I was in a very dark place first time around. So that's why I got into researching my postpartum, and that's why I can say it's so true. And I hope the women who are going to hear this interview are going to feel the same way.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you said you can't find practitioners to refer to, that's why we also made this online summit, because a few women are speaking here are the ones that we refer women to, but we live in the capital city in Zagreb, and the rest of Croatia or the region really lacks this kind of support. So that is you know, something we really need to change, but that's why we do things like this. Yes. Okay, if someone who is listening gave birth many years ago, or 2 or 20 years ago, what can she do to heal her postpartum experience? And also, it's very, I wanted to ask you about, as you said, the oxytocin affects healing of the tissue. A lot of women get episiotomies here, and what can she do now if that happened to her?
If there was an episiotomy.
And if she also had a very hard postpartum experience, and she couldn't heal. She didn't have a lot of oxytocin. She didn't have people who cared for her.
Well, I mean, you know, I think it's the same for any kind of birth experience, really, but rest is the primary medicine of the postpartum time. So especially with an episiotomy, rest, you know, I think in the modern time, our orientation is that we want really big solutions, you know, but the solutions are always in the most simple. So rest, right? So that means like you're really not doing anything except for being with your baby for the first 6 weeks after birth. you're not cooking, you're not doing the cleaning, that your community is showing up to support you with that, So rest is the foundational medicine really to any pelvic problem. And so it's like curative medicine is what rest is, but it's also preventative medicine. And there really is nothing better that you can do for the short and long-term health of your pelvic floor in the early postpartum time apart from rest. So rest, and then sitz baths are going to be really great, And then I think vaginal steaming is a really great thing once someone's comfortable to get into a position to do that. Like you can get into hands and knees, like with your butt in the air too, instead of sitting on a stool. And that might work for someone, but that's a way to keep stitches clean while the tissue is healing, and just bring like warmth and circulation. So it's rest and warmth and the food that you're eating. I mean, these are just like the primary foundational pieces to any postpartum healing, but especially when we've had extra layers of trauma in our birth, they're that much more important, And then what was the other piece that you asked? Oh, someone's way far out postpartum time. So, like the reason that early window in the postpartum time is called the sacred window in Ayurvedic medicine, or the golden opportunity in Chinese medicine, is because, and in allopathic medicine, they actually call it like a sensitive period. It's because all of our physiologic systems are readjusting. Okay. I mean, that's like everything that I teach about. Like every system in our body has been reconfigured through pregnancy and is being reconfigured through the postpartum time. So it's an opportunity to actually come into better health through focused care and attention in the early postpartum period. We have an opportunity to like eliminate pre-existing dis-ease conditions through adequate proper care in the early postpartum time, because of the sensitive nature of our physiology and psychology in that time. So that's the window, right? And that being said, it's like, it's not ever too late for healing to happen. It's not that like somehow a door closes and then we no longer have access to it. And so let's say if someone is having big digestive problems years out, they probably have gone to a doctor. They maybe have even started taking medication prescribed to them by a doctor for who knows what relative to their digestive condition. But it's to understand and look back at your own history. It's like, when did that start? And if that started after the birth of your last baby, it's like, what can you start doing to take better care of your digestive health? So, what you can do is like go back to eating postpartum style food, no matter how far out you are postpartum, like even if you're 10 years out, because what happens through pregnancy and birth is like our enzymatic production actually decreases and our microflora decreases, right? Because there's a physiologic stress of labor and birth, even if it was a beautiful, undisturbed birth, okay? And so we're supposed to be eating foods in the postpartum time that are easy to digest and they're warm in nature, because they're helping to rekindle our digestive fires, which are things like rekindle the enzymes, rekindle our microflora, rekindle hydrochloric acid, okay? So go back to eating like a postpartum diet for 6 weeks of time. Eat easy to digest food, eat bone broth, eat things that are going to help to create helpful microflora in your body. And the access to food is going to depend on where we're at on this planet in terms of what we can eat that's appropriate in that way. Yeah. But even on the level of supplementation, it's like our bodies have to have the capacity to receive the benefits of the supplements. And if our digestive system is weakened, we may not even be able to receive the help of supplementation. So food always as first medicine, right? And then what's true is that most women, maybe all women in the modern world, are deficient in certain things, especially omega-3 fatty acids. And so what is the access in your community to omega-3 fatty acids, right? So, supplementation wise, that's like cod liver, right? It's cold water fish. It's pasture fed beef. It's pasture fed eggs. But we need to get sufficient omega-3s into our bodies because it affects short-term health in terms of our mood and how we feel, and long-term health in terms of our cognitive capacities. So, I mean, this like list can go on, but the point is that it's not ever too late to heal. Even if you've had urinary incontinence for the past 20 years, if you were to start receiving pelvic floor help, you can heal that. They're not fixed things in time. And so I know from my experience that healing is always available to us.
Thank you. How long does actually the postpartum recovery last? Is it the 40 days, or is it the fourth trimester, or is it 9 months, as long as you created the baby, or is it does it never end actually?
I think it kind of just depends on all of our individual subjective experiences in that, you know. I mean, there is truth in that, like, we have this window of that sensitive period for the first 6 weeks after birth, so about 40 days. And then, yeah, we can say, well, okay, but maybe it's actually 9 months until, like, gestation is actually complete of our baby, right? Because we have a period of exogestation. Or we can say, well, maybe it's actually 3 years, because that's when, like, a baby really kind of has completed its, well, you know, I mean, that's all subjective too, but we can say, well, maybe 3 years is a marker in time too. But I mean, you know, and then we can say, well, actually you're just postpartum for life. So I think it's all of those answers are true. I don't think it's either or. I think it's both and. And I think it's also important that women recognize that we're postpartum not just after we give birth to live babies, but we're postpartum after any time we carry a pregnancy. So if that pregnancy ends in miscarriage, if that pregnancy ends in abortion, if that pregnancy ends as a stillbirth, like, we're still in a postpartum time. And postpartum care is still as important, if not more important, after all of those pregnancy experiences.
I read an answer somewhere that I liked. It said, longer than you think, and longer than you expect. Because we give ourselves, it has to be done like 6 weeks, there's a checkup, and it's done, and it's not. Maybe 6 weeks, 3 months, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, my daughter is 9, and it's like, I feel, you know, it's not that I feel postpartum in my body, but it's like, I'm definitely not who I was before, you know, and I definitely am, like, you know, we're constantly pulling threads from our own birth experiences and our postpartum experiences and just that change into motherhood. So I totally still feel like I'm in that. And sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just still an extension of the postpartum time. But then what I think about too is that, like, in the conversation of the postpartum period, like, really what we're talking about is not just the postpartum period. We're talking about motherhood, right? Because the, like, epidemic levels that were of all kinds of things that we're witnessing, and just the total dysfunction in the modern way of life is really more about motherhood and how mothers are supported or not, and how mothers are honored or not. And it's not just the postpartum time, right? It's like, it's understanding what it means in roles and responsibilities to be a mother. And so I always kind of pull it in, because people can spin out, right, and talk about all of the horrible things that are happening on Mother Earth, you know, and you know, everyone's freaking out and has really reactionary responses to the crises on Earth, you know. And it's like, okay, well, let's pull it in within what's accessible and possible within our immediate situation, right? Because here I am in the United States, and I could freak out and run all this anxiety about the fires in Australia, okay? But what is my actual reach? Well, what is happening for the mothers in my environment? You know, am I bringing them food? Like, do I even know who's had a baby? When I see a mother, am I helping her out? And so there's this exact connection between how we're taking care of mothers and how we're respecting mothers, and how we're taking care of the earth and how we're respecting the earth. And so if we want to be able to continue on this planet as a species, then we just start centering the mothers, and we start taking care of the mothers. And I'm certain that the earth will reflect that. So it is the postpartum time, but it's this much larger issue of the way that we have been indoctrinated to not respect and to even destroy that which is life-sustaining.
What if what if somebody's listening and her friend will give birth in a month, let's say? How can she care for that friend? So what is your message to the community? How should we take care of mothers?
So I think, we're in a really challenging time because like, if we're postpartum doulas or even we're a friend, it's like as a doula, as a friend, as a whatever human, like you can't be a village, right? And it's really easy as an individual when we start to understand how fractured our reality is in regards to support of mothers. It's really easy for us to like want to do everything because we see how much need there is, and it's really easy for us to like martyr ourselves, like I know how much this mother needs and so I'm going to do it all, and then it's really easy for us as individuals to burn out. So obviously I think that if you have a friend who's going to give birth, then support her, follow your intuition. And if you don't have a baseline of the postpartum time, and if you've never had a baby, then learn about it by talking to other mothers. There's just foundational pieces of what we need in the postpartum time. Rest, but in order for a mother to rest, she needs support, because a mother who has other children can't rest if her other children aren't being taken care of, right? If she doesn't have someone else cooking. So there's rest, there's appropriate foods, learn about the foods. There's body work. If you do body work, you can offer body work. And then there's warmth, right? So warmth in terms of her environment, warmth in terms of like not being alone, right? And all of those pieces require the foundation of community to actually happen. Like none of them can actually happen without community. So I really feel like the primary medicine, like if I was going to say one thing, is that we need to revitalize our community networks and our community support. So if you're that one person who holds this big charge of understanding the needs of this friend of yours, then figure out how to do networking and support her with the networking so that it's not just you, because it can't just be you. Because you have your own needs as a human, and you might have your own family, and you have your own life. And the needs of a postpartum mother are really high because she just created a human with her body and birthed a human and now is growing a human on the outside of her. And it's for us to really get how resource intensive that is to do all of that work. So it's much larger than what one person can do. So as one person, how can we network within our community? How can we support this mother to network so that she has a community holding her and not just one person?
Thank you. I wanted to go to the beginning when I asked you about postpartum is a rite of passage. What does that actually mean? And can you explain it in a way that it is a message to women who gave birth a long time ago, maybe, and so that they can also recognize themselves in that?
So it's to understand that we can have a passage or we have a rite of passage, right? And I mean, rite of passage was coined by like a French anthropologist, right? But in this coining of this term, rites of passage, it was because there was cross-cultural similarities of these ceremonies, of these rituals, of these celebrations that we do to mark moments in time. So let me just see how I can be like concise with this. So it's really to understand that like as humans, we're part of the earth, and the earth has cycles, right? Like we are born, we live, we die, we return, we're like, and everything's like this. Like you can look at a tree, it goes back to the earth, it becomes compost for new life to come forward, and there's not like an end to anything, right? There's birth and there's death and there's rebirth and then there's death and rebirth and like that. And it's to acknowledge ourselves as part of these natural cycles of Earth. Like, we are part of Earth, we are part of these cycles, and we're not exempt from them. And so that in our big life experiences, whether that's, the first time we begin bleeding and we're transitioning from a girl to a woman, or we're getting married, or we're having a baby, or someone really close to us dies, or any of these big passages in life, there's a part of us that is going to die in these experiences, because the old has to die in order to give way for the new to come. So as we're in this transition of becoming a mother, through pregnancy and then the birth experience, there is a part of us that's dying. And whether it's the first baby we're having or the 10th baby we're having, it doesn't really matter. But some part of us has to die in order for the new to come forward. So, the way that we can think about it really practically is like some relationships that we have may no longer work for us, right? We may lose friendships. It may be that in claiming how we want things or how we're going to do things in our family, in the family we're creating, it creates ripples within our family system, and our own parents maybe reject us even. Okay, it's a point of maturation. So things begin to die off so that in our maturation, we can become who we're being shaped to become through the experience. And a rite of passage is like the experience itself. So like whatever the big experience is, in this continuum, it's birth. But then after that experience, the only actual way for a rite of passage to be complete is through community acknowledgement and witnessing. So if we go through these big experiences, but we don't have the community to witness us, it's like what we talked about in the beginning. We have had a passage, but we have not had a rite of passage. And to understand that is to understand that everything in nature is reciprocal. So there's a give and take always in nature, and there's a give and take that's inherent in ourselves, in our relationships as humans. So whoever the individual is going through the rite of passage, they're going through it, yes, for themselves in a way, right? Because they're being transformed by the experience, but they're going through that experience on behalf of the community too. And it's the community needs that person to have a completed rite of passage in order for its health and continuation. So it's not just that mothers are missing out on the rite of experience, the rite of passage, but it's the communities that are missing out, because the community is not learning from the mother about how she's been transformed. Okay. So they're not being informed and educated and maturing, okay, by understanding what was that like and how does that inform the collective consciousness. And that mother is not being able to complete her rite of passage, which is damaging to herself as an individual, because that community is not showing up as witness. So both are negatively affected. So the flip side of that and the potentiality of what could exist is that by the community supporting and deeply nourishing mother, okay, the community does that because the community is invested in the complete recovery of mother, because they understand that she's the one who's educating and raising the next generation of children. And they want her to be able to do that in her fullness, because that directly impacts the continuation of the community. And so it's a reciprocal thing in there that people need to understand. It's that communities need to support mothers because mothers are supporting the community. And when that is broken, we have the world that we have right now. And so if we want to create a different world, then we support the mothers, because the mothers are the ones who are first and foremost going to resource back that community through properly educating and raising and nourishing and teaching the children who will be the adults in the next generation.
Yeah, I just watched a video of a midwife talking about brain waves and all the slow brain waves that are actually states of deep meditation or sleep that women who give birth go into while giving birth, and all the information that they can download, and all of that the community is missing if we don't support mothers after birth.
Yeah.
My last question is, what piece of information has changed your view on postpartum? Maybe 10 years ago, maybe, I don't know, 5 years ago? What was it?
I mean, I kind of feel like it's my whole life experience that changed my view on postpartum, because how I ended up creating this training that I teach in 2015 was because I lived in a community that was full of home birth midwives. It was a very home birth centered community. And I had started to do, I had a practice that was called holistic well woman care practice. So I did intravaginal work, like we're talking about. I did uterine massage, I did breast massage, and my background's midwifery. And so I thought, oh, I'm going to offer postpartum care. I had a very busy practice, and people knew me in the community. So I thought, oh, I'll offer postpartum care. It just seemed like a no-brainer, I do this work. It's very busy. There's so many midwives. And there's no one doing this. It's perfect. Really, innocently, I'm like, yeah, this is what it needs, And there was literally zero response from the mother community where I lived to me offering postpartum care. And I was like, well, that's weird. I just thought, So then I thought, well, I'll write to the midwives, right, who are attending births, the 25 midwives in this very small community. I'll write to them and let them know that I'm focusing on postpartum care and I'm not going to birth. And it's perfect because, midwifery in the United States is very fractured and midwives don't have time to do postpartum care. So I'll do it. So I wrote to them and no one wrote back to me. And then I was like, well, maybe my email didn't go through, So I wrote to them again. And then I had one of 25 midwives write back to me and just say, oh, that's a good idea. And I was like, okay. And so I didn't understand at the time what was going on. I really didn't understand why there was no response. And so then I was sitting with it. And then one day I was like, oh my God, there's no response because people don't even know what they don't know right now. That's where we're at collectively. So there's no response because everybody thinks that it is a luxury. And I did write that thing, now it's this common thing that you see all over memes and stuff on the internet. But I'm pretty sure that I was probably one of the first ones to say that postpartum care is a necessity and not a luxury in 2015. And I put it out there and I wrote this one article, and I wasn't even thinking at the time that oh, I'm going to focus on postpartum work. But I wrote this one article and it was just went viral, and to me it was just so basic. And so then I sat with that and I was like, I don't understand any of this that's going on. Why is there no response here? Why does everyone think this article that, it's good, but it's not that amazing? Why is it blowing up? And then I got this download of, we are really in this fractured experience, even when it comes to midwifery care, right? And then the second part to that, though, is you have to finish putting the puzzle pieces together. It's well, how did that even happen? Even within midwifery care. And that's to really acknowledge intergenerational trauma and ancestral grief. We can't do any of the postpartum work without acknowledging how and why all of our respective lineages have been fractured, which has been purposeful attacks on our respective indigenous ways of life for several thousands of years on the planet. And so my work is a culmination of my midwifery work and then my spiritual work in understanding that we're in a time of repair. We're repairing what has been purposefully fractured for a very long time, and we're living the consequences now. And so we're in a time of healing that. So, it's part of my like personal healing work. It's part of my like collective healing work. It's just healing work.
Thank you. It's especially here where we've had a war like 30 years ago, and then a couple of wars before that, also like in the last 100 years. So there's a lot of that ancestral grief and trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I have heard your message, your talks many times, and I'm always in awe. And I'm struggling to find the right words. That's why Yela is doing this interview, because I'm still in a postpartum phase. But just I feel this huge yes in my chest every time I hear you. I have to say that.
Thank you.
Please tell us, where, I will also have it in written on a slide after the video, but where can women find you that feel recognition in your works, and tell us about your trainings.
Mm-hmm. So my website's innatetraditions.com, INNATE traditions. And there's information about my trainings as well. And so my trainings, I like to focus on working with like birth and healthcare providers who are serving postpartum mothers and families. And I do trainings in person, and usually I do them based out of New Mexico when they're in person, and I also teach online, and I do that once a year. So like right now we're like 4 weeks into this year's training, and so next year's training will probably start in January, probably go from January to June 2021. And I do want to come to Europe sometime in the next couple of years. So that's like on my radar for sure, And so when it's online, it's 6 months. We meet once a week for 6 months. And then we do what it takes 6 months to do online in 7 days in an in-person training. So it's like a deep dive into holistic postpartum physiology and psychology, to give everyone like the necessary tools. It's kind of like giving the language to things that we may know in our hearts or we know in our bones, but we need to have the language of it to be able to translate it out. Like one of my friends, she says, if we don't have the language for something, it's as if it doesn't exist. And so it's having to have that language to be able to translate it out to the world.
Thank you for your wise words. You will be able to ask questions in our Facebook group. Rachelle will be there with us. Do you have anything to say? No. She's in love.
Like I said before, struggling to find the right words, but you said it all.
Thank you both.